got an interesting list to look at, and I apologize for the sketchiness of the font. I did a copy from a screenshot and it came out a bit scraggly. This is a timeline of what is taking place historically. And for those of you like myself that were unaware of it, they're trying to correct some dates, such as the birth of Jesus actually occurs in 4 BC. Now, before everybody gets upset about that one, you got to remember time did not start counting, or they didn't start counting time the day Jesus was born. Sometime later on is when they decided, oh, well, we'll start counting history based on when Jesus was born. And we believe he was born at this time. And we're probably talking about a couple hundred years after his birth is when they started creating the time system. Well, probably based on information such as when the tax was occurring that was paid by Joseph, that he was returning back to his hometown, they were able to better identify the year he was born in. And that actually turns out to be 4 BC. So that's an interesting one. Paul, based on some other external documentation, they are guessing is somewhere between 5 and 10 AD as far as his birth. So we've got the crucifixion occurring in 30 AD, which that one doesn't change at all, it appears. The point when Jesus meets Saul on the road to Damascus is 33 AD. So that would be about then 3 years out from the very beginning of Luke's accounting of Acts. And then we have the 3 years when Paul actually goes from Damascus over to Arabia and comes back again. We find that recorded in Galatians. So that's not covered in Acts itself. Galatians is where he talks about that. And then we have Paul visiting Damascus, or going to from Damascus to Jerusalem, meaning he's gone from Damascus to Arabia, back to Damascus, and then on to Jerusalem, 36 AD. And then Paul in Tarsus, being 36 to 46. That one's a hard time to determine, because how each of these dates are being determined is little small bits of information that are either included in Acts or in one of the letter accounts, where they say, oh, this person was in power. Oh, well, they were only in power for 3 years. Or this event was occurring. Oh, that puts it between this time and this time frame. So the ones where it says a specific year, that's because a specific event was occurring and they know exactly what was happening. Like 40 AD is when the statue was erected in Jerusalem. Actually, Caligula's statue ends up getting erected in the temple itself. And boy, did that cause a problem. So you've got the assassination of Caligula in 41. The famine visit, that's when Paul is going around collecting money for supporting Jerusalem. That is occurring between 46 and 47. And again, that's one of those things, oh, we know when the famine occurred. So they're able to nail down then these particular points within Acts chapter 11, which we're well past that right now, and Galatians. And then we have 47 to 48, which is Paul and Barnabas on the first missionary journey. And we pegged that out, I believe, to be there in Acts 15, 16 area. So just looking at Pentecost being around 33, all the way out to when Paul and Barnabas are heading out on that first missionary journey, Acts 1 to Acts 16, we're talking about a difference of 14 to 15 years. And so Galatians is being written around 48, and there's some debate because it's believed that Thessalonians, First Thessalonians was the first one written. That's where all that conflict occurred. And so that is potentially being written in 47, 48. There's some debate on this. This is from one particular author. Most right now are dating First and Second Thessalonians before and after Galatians. So you've got First Thessalonians, Galatians, Second Thessalonians. Romans also is dated close to the time of Galatians. Some even postulate that when he wrote the letter to Romans, he was working from the letter to the Galatians, because a lot of the issues he's addressing in short form to the church in Galatia, he addresses in a longer format when writing to those in Rome. So time-wise, we're up to 49 right now with where we're reading in Acts. So a lot of stuff's been occurring. Sometimes it helps to be able to see timeline-wise what's been going on at the same time. And like I said, a lot of these dates are able to be determined because of different events that are recorded at the same time. So they're able to historically know, okay, if this is taking place, say in Galatians, we know time-wise, the letter to the Galatians was written in 48. First and Second Thessalonians, that one got bumped because of some of the stuff that's in First Thessalonians that they believe puts it just before the writing of Galatians itself. So I just thought that would be helpful to be able to see how much of a span of time we've had going on during the stuff we've had going in Acts. Ready to jump into Acts?
Sure, I have a question.
Go for it.
I heard one of the things that I was watching on Acts that Paul traveled like 14 to 16,000 miles in those two. So they added up the miles he would have traveled. I guess a lot of it on foot, but some of it on the ship too. Does that sound right? That's huffing it right there.
Yeah, I think that sounds a little bit on the high side, but part of the problem is we don't know a lot about the one time right up here when it's in the 33 to 36. We have no information about what he was doing specifically in Arabia at that time. We do see,
it could have been more.
Could have been more. We do see him traveling around, and sometimes there are three cities that were real close together. And I mean, they're within eyesight of each other. So you could be on one hill and look and see on a different hill off in one direction a city, look off in the opposite direction, you're going to see another city. We're talking about only miles apart. And so how much he might have been commuting back and forth between these areas, don't know. We just know he was a guy that was on the move, sometimes on the run, to make sure people didn't catch up with him that were ticked off with him spreading the truth that they didn't want to hear. But yeah, the amount of mileage he covered, especially considered that he shortcutted it a couple times by boat, was a pretty impressive a distance. All right, let's stop that share and we'll switch over to that one. All right, hopefully I'm learning what I'm doing a bit. So this is Acts chapter 17, and we were up to verse 21 last week. Now we're heading off in a different direction with Paul, and the crowd he's talking to is different. He's not, in this case, talking to Jews. He's not talking to God-fearing Gentiles. This is Paul stepping out into a crowd of people who've got no belief in God and potentially don't even believe in the concept of gods, because the word that's getting translated God might be better translated demon or jinn. Because you got to remember, we're dealing with the Middle East, and for them, the common concept was of a jinn, which was not necessarily good or evil. It was a mix. So there was no good jinn. It's like people. It's a big mix of good and evil, and they are what they are. So starting with verse 22, it says, then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus, sorry about that tongue-tied there, and said, men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. And that word is actually superstitious. For as I was passing through and considered the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they shall seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. And I'll go ahead and stop at that point, because there's a lot to be covered or thought about here. Like I said, that was probably better translated to the unknown demon. The word actually might have been God that was on the altar, but for their concept, when he says very religious, very superstitious, it's essentially saying you all believe anything. And he's working with that. And based on the fact you all believe anything, I got something even better than everything you've got. And when he's proclaiming one God, monotheism, this is something that already is unique only to Judaism. Every other system under the sun at this time is a pantheon. You got the God of the hills, you got the God in the sea, you've got the God in the mountain, you got the God down in the plain. We saw that in the Old Testament on a couple of occasions. And then you have the God of the rats. That's why you had the rats with the tumors on them in the one situation. You've got all those Egyptian gods, and I think there's something like 13 gods of death in the Egyptian pantheon. So those are dealing with gods. And then on top of all that, you've got the crowd that is dealing with jinn, where you just appease the jinn. And it's not even a specific concept as far as what they represent. It was just making sure this particular jinn that you thought would be friendly to you stays friendly to you, or a jinn that you thought was evil and nasty, that you did whatever you needed to do to keep him leaving you alone. It was wild, wild west. And just to make sure we got all the bases covered, we're going to set up this other altar for everything we've forgotten. And so they're all part of this unknown God, powerful being thing. And we'll even sacrifice to that. So Paul here is doing the same kind of thing, but with a different kind of people that John does in chapter 1. Because the word that John uses in John 1:1, in the beginning was the word, that Greek word is logos. The Greek word logos referred to the concept of the law, order, and structure of the universe. That power, that rule was greater than all the Greek gods combined, because all of them had to conform to the logos. What Paul is doing here is the same kind of thing. I'm talking to you about a God who made the world. For the people that are here, they're thinking, okay, that's one God. He's Lord of heaven. That's another God. Lord of the earth. That's another God. Doesn't dwell in temples made by hands, worshiped by hands, yada, yada, yada. Gave life. That's another God, because they have God of fertility, God of life, God of other things along that line. Right there, we've already named off 4 different gods, and we haven't even tossed in dealing with the moon, the stars. Each one of these things is a whole nother God. Each star is potentially a God. He's wrapping all of those gods into one mega huge God beyond all their comprehension. And what he's telling them is, okay, you're seeking after this concept. And verse 27, you're groping for it, you're trying to find it. Well, okay, I'm ready to tell you it's not one that's really far off. And 28, for in him we live and move and have our being. Now he's starting to blend in a concept that's foreign to them. Because when they worship their gods, it's not because any of their gods had a set of rules. There is not a set of scriptures on how to worship and be pleasing to Zeus or to Hera or to Hercules or to Jupiter. Pick your god from any of the pantheons. There might be the god's favorite sacrifice, and there might be the thing that annoys that god the most, but no rules and regulations, no how to live your life. So verse 28, in him we live and move and have our being, that's a different kind of message. As also some of your poets have said, for we are also his offspring. I've forgotten which poet he's quoting, but that's a concept, again, we can tie back into the Old Testament. We tie it back in 2 different ways. The children of Israel viewed themselves as being the children of God. What are we? We're also children of God. Where Christ is his son, we are adopted heirs, joint heirs with him. So not only is that a concept from their poetry, it's an Old Testament biblical concept, it's a New Testament biblical concept. And I'll go ahead and slide down here a bit then. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and men's devising. All right. When the Greeks would talk about the offspring of a god, if it was 2 gods, they produced another god. If it was a god and a human, they produced what was called a demigod, something that had power, but wasn't as God-like in their level of power. To say that we are the offspring of God, in a sense, he's saying, oh, by the way, you don't even believe what you claim to believe. Because what was Hercules supposed to have been? Hercules was supposed to have been a bad relationship with the head god and a mortal female. So you got the demigod Hercules, half human, half god. And so to claim to be offsprings of God, they knew that was a lie in their own system. You got no advantage of what the poet wrote about. being an offspring of God. It didn't give you any special powers. It didn't give you any kind of special relationship. You still were in fear of when this God would have a bad hair day and decide to strike somebody dead because they weren't happy with themselves. So Paul is now starting to change how they think about being the offspring of God. And then he brings up another concept. Divine nature is not something like silver, gold, and stone. And this relates to one of the gods, and I want to say it was Zeus. The carving of Zeus, they claimed, was a stone that fell from the skies, and that's how it appeared. Most likely what that means is the Zeus statue was carved from a meteor. But over time, the carved part gets left out. The statue of Zeus fell from the sky and they built the temple around it. I don't doubt that they built the temple around it. I do doubt that the statue of Zeus fell from the sky. But think about that one. What they're claiming is that statue wasn't even carved. And that's how you knew that Zeus was a god in a sense. But if I create my own god from gold or silver or stone, which where he's at, I think there were over 1,000 different altars for these different godlike beings or jinn, that all they had to do was look over and see, well, there's the god of head lice over here. And what does that god look like? And whose idea was it? And the more you start to think about it, the more comical it becomes. Do we in Christianity have a picture, an idol of God? No. Nobody is ever, I mean, yes, artists will make up their concept of God. The Michelangelo one that's painted on the ceiling and so forth. But every Christian who looks at that knows, nope, that's just an artist's idea. Is that really God? Definitely not. Michelangelo's painting of the Last Supper, is that even a picture of Jesus? No. They have paintings from that time period. One of the ones that exists still, it's pretty rough and beaten up, is a painting of Paul. It's just the headshot. It's on something, I want to say a bit bigger than a coin. So yes, we do have paintings dating back before even the time of Christ. So in the case of Paul, we actually have a rough idea of what he might have looked like. But the whole idea that you can fashion from gold or silver or stone what these gods look like that people have never really seen, when you start to think about it, the concept starts to get silly. If we think about a cross, have we seen crosses? Oh, yeah. Have they dug up historical cross kind of stuff where a town was crucified because they went against Rome? Oh, yeah. Nice set of those X kind of crosses lined up along a street where they've dug up the stuff. That's historical. That's something that can be reached back into archaeology, or with archaeology, and in a sense touched and identified to say, yeah, this is something real. Whereas he's pointing out to him, if it's really divine, are you going to have really a clue about what it looks like and able to capture that in something you fashioned by yourselves? Verse 30, truly, these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He's given assurance of this to all by raising him from the dead. Okay. He's acknowledging there in verse 30, everything we've just talked about is based on ignorance. The idea that you can fashion a God out of anything, totally lame, bogus. And then the idea that there is time of judgment, in a lot of the pantheons, they already had that concept. They knew that there was some kind of end times thing that was going to come. Sometimes it was a battle, sometimes it was just out and out destruction. But they were already working with this concept that in some way it all comes to an end and things are going to be known for what they are. So when he starts talking about the ignorance and that you need to change because judgment is coming, they're already halfway on the page with him because they have an expectation. There is an end times kind of event that will eventually come. In some cases, they believe an end times thing already happened. The time between the Titans and the gods with Greek mythology. And I almost want to say, I think the same kind of thing with Norse mythology as well. Both of those had a separation of some kind of godlike being occurred, and then that got overthrown. And then that era got wiped out, and a new era with more powerful gods came into being. And that era is going to come to an end. And when that happens, everything gets destroyed. So this concept is one that's there in the same sense that for we are also his offspring is there and is present culturally speaking. The idea that people need to obey his commands is jumping back to living, moving, and having our being in him. That is the concept that they're having to start scratching their heads and go, wait a second. There's a standard that we need to be acting based upon. That could have its pluses. Because right now, with the gods that they have, the 1,000 plus, anything goes. And sort of like if, as I said, the god has a bad hair day, you could get struck dead because of it. Not because of anything you did right or wrong, just because he's in a bad mood. Yeah. I see your hand.
So yeah, I was listening to a podcast that was talking about that. And they said you have to be careful. You know, a lot of people wear crosses on their neck or have a cross on their wall. But that's fine, but you have to be careful, you know, that you don't put your faith in that cross, that thing, that it has the power to do something for you.
Right. And that's a very important discussion. It's one of the ones we've actually had in one of my graduate courses recently. We see this in both the Old Testament, we see it in the New Testament in Paul's writings. When Moses crafted the bronze serpent, because God told him to do so, and told the people, when you look on the serpent, even though you've been snake bit, poisoned, you will live. It had a specific purpose at that time because God gave that instruction. They kept the snake, set it up on a pole next to the temple, leaning up against the temple, and it was there for the next 50 years after the temple was constructed. They would worship God in the temple proper, and those that wanted to went around beside the temple and worshiped this bronze serpent because they felt that worshiping that bronze serpent did something relative to their Judaism, as though that somehow made it better or special. In the New Testament, when Paul writes about that, when he talks about days, months, seasons, and so forth, he talks about it two ways. At one point in time, he says, no. And if you do any of this, you're held accountable for all of it. He's writing to different audiences. And that's an important thing to remember with each of these letters. He's writing to people who have different types of problems. So in the case of the letter to the Galatians, when he's writing to them, they're dealing with a lot of Judaizing teachers who are coming in and telling them to be a Christian, you've got to comply with all of the law, because in doing that, that makes you a better Christian. Except, is there anything that makes you better or worse in the eyes of God once you're covered in the blood of Christ? No. Because if there were such a thing, you'd have to have this hierarchy of what actions you do to make you a better Christian listed in Scripture. So we saw this with First Corinthians. And the one that was puffing them up was speaking in tongues. Except he knocks them down the notch and says, hey, I'd rather that you prophesied, that you were teachers. Yeah, it'd be great if everybody spoke in tongues, but one, not everybody has it. Two, that's not the important stuff. They were building up false standards and saying, oh, well, it takes this. Oh, well, it takes that. We don't have any of that going on in Scripture. We don't have fasting. We're told about fasting. We're told how to do it. We're told why to do it. Does fasting make you a better Christian? No. It's for the purpose of bringing yourself closer to God, being more in tune with what it is God desires of you. But beyond that, what's that for? That's for the individual. It doesn't make you better, make you worse. Giving. You can give all the money you've got. You can give 10%. You could be giving less. Does the dollar value or does the relative proportion of how much you give make you better or worse? No. The benefit of ritual behavior is between you and God. If it helps you focus better to go through a ritual, that's helping you focus as an individual. Does that mean it's going to help everybody else? Nope. Fact is, one of the places I liked the most and found frustrating the most at the same time, Gainesville Church of Christ. Every single service, you knew about the fourth song in, they were going to sing Sweet Hour of Prayer. And it bothered me that they always sang Sweet Hour of Prayer. Why can't you sing one of the other prayer songs? That part bothered me. But right after that is when those who had need of prayer were standing. And then they would go through the entire group that was present that day of those that were standing, and each would say what their prayer need was that week, or praise and so forth. It's how they did it. Did that make it right or wrong? Nope. If it was something that brought them more into focus, all power to them. If singing high church songs, and by high church, I mean the stuff that was written by the old guys that had long hair and so forth from the 1600s, if that makes you feel more reverential and easier to focus on God, well, that's great. If singing the devotional songs are what helps you to focus better on the heart of Jesus, that's great. Does any one of those things make a one person better than another? Not at all. Does singing high church type of old long hair stuff make it better? Nope. Devo songs make you better? Nope. Reading scripture as opposed to singing songs make it better or worse? Nope. It's all about you as an individual. It's all about you seeking the heart of God, going back to Malachi, but going back to everything we see in the New Testament. So it's frustrating because there are so many ways people try to take something. Sometimes it's a program, and they try to elevate it, and there's nothing to elevate above, because there's the head That's Christ. And everything else is there for our benefit if we choose to use it that way. And if we don't use it the right way, like fasting, well, I've fasted this many times and I fasted for this long, that shows you I'm the real mature Christian. No, it doesn't. That just shows you're arrogant and boasting about it. Well, I gave this much money and I give this many times a week, or I give specifically to these purposes. Good for you. If that's what you're gifted with, go for it. It's, again, even the gifting. It wasn't about what the gift was, because even when Paul's making that statement in First Corinthians, we already know what the answer was really about. It's from First Corinthians chapter 11. What is that? Glorify God in all that you do. And beyond that, it's like not Ecclesiastes, Old Testament. It is Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanity. Doesn't matter what you pick. It's all vanity when you're putting your hope in it. What are you supposed to put your hope in? One thing only, and that's God. And I talked way too long. So, yeah, it's a hard issue because it creeps in so often. And if we're not careful, we allow practices to become almost codified and sanctified and a whole lot of fide. That none of it deserves it. It might be a great behavior for today that years from now, everybody's going to scratch their head. Why in the world did they do that? How in the world could they think that kind of song was praiseworthy to God? I mean, that's so dry. It's so slow. It's so bouncy. Oh, who knows what it's so. It's what was bringing you closer to God because you were focusing on God, not because fasting was great or this 12-step program is better. It's what enabled you to get your heart in a righter condition when you were working on glorifying God in your life. Did I answer the question, or did I just go swarking around in circles? That was just shaking. That was good. Okay. I thought you were going to say, no, that was a real big circle, Rich.
No.
Okay. Well,
And it was, when I was listening to, he had a way of explaining. I'm not good at, I'm not good at explaining. That's why I'm not a teacher. But it was like people that have these crosses on their walls, or Catholics got their rosary beads or whatever it is, and they think that has the power.
right.
And they say if they didn't have that, it wouldn't work. That's just like having an idol.
Yes, it is. Because what have you done there? You have given power to something other than God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I have one or two cross necklaces. I have a bracelet or two that have crosses on it. And the purpose of all those is not to show to anybody. The purpose of all those is by it being on my person. I will see it throughout the day. I will feel it on my wrist or on my neck. And it's there to remind me of who I represent. How am I supposed to act? Not because it does me any benefit or because it's got any power, but because it's reminding me. Anybody else looking at it? Oh, wow, he's one of them religious people. He's got a cross on. Or he's real religious. Look at how big his cross is. Oh, boy. I can remember days when I first started working at the University of Florida. There was somebody that I worked relatively close to who wore around his neck a wooden cross that was at least 1 foot long and 6 inches wide. And I thought to myself, what in the world are you trying to do with this? I guess he was bearing his cross that week. I don't know, because does that make it better for him? No. Might it have been special to him and that it was reminding of him of the cross Jesus bore? Maybe. In which case, more power to him and doing something that was meaningful to him. But is it effectively changing his religious state with God? Nope. It's only between the individual and God as to what they are trying to do to bring themselves in a righter state of mind. Beyond that, like you said, you're making it into a magic talisman. And there's no magic talisman that I can find talked about in the New Testament. There was those goofball Irish that decided, oh yeah, let's first talk about selling indulgences. And then after we've sold all these indulgences, oh yeah, I happen to have here one of the toenail clippings of St. Paul. And this toenail clipping will heal you of hair loss. Look, none of my chickens have lost any hair. See how effective it is. Can I have a bid? Oh, those greedy Irishmen. Anyway.
That's funny.
But, well, it's funny until somebody believes it. And then it's so pathetic, because what are they really doing? They're doing what we just read about. They're going up and creating this new idol, this new God. If you think about some of the times when you're reading the New Testament and it talks about sorcery, there's 2 different ways that could have been looked at. You can think about those that believe that there was magical power, the kind of sorcery we tend to think about. Or you can think about it the way you just described it. I've got that cross wrist bracelet here, and because I'm wearing it, I will definitely get the job I'm interviewing, because I am taking God with me into the interview. This is my own little miniature Ark of the Covenant that I'm toting along with me to make sure I overpower them with the love of God. I can so picture.
A lot of people out there. There's a lot of people out there that think that. A lot.
Yep. We need to be careful about judging.
Yep. I'm not judging. I'm just pointing out an error in the way that they thought. But here again.
Yeah, I agree with that. But
think about what happens with the issue of eating meat. Some who believed in God still believed that eating meat gave the gods power over them. And so they couldn't eat it. Or flip side, the Jews who believed that it was tainted by worshiping the other gods. Again, somehow that meat being sacrificed to something that's nothing made that meat bad to eat. Oh, no, Jews had it wrong, just as wrong as the Greeks had it wrong, or Gentiles had it wrong. Because all that was nothing, even when it was a false god. So here we have the tail end of this, verse 32. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We'll hear you again on this matter." So Paul departed from among them. However, some men joined him and believed, among them Dionysius the Areopagite, a woman named Damaris, and others with them. Okay. The reason why some would not mock is because some of them, Greeks in particular, had a belief that the soul continued. Not all had a belief in the soul continuing, but many of those who had a belief in the pantheons, Egyptians, Romans, Greeks, Norse obviously as well, had a belief of the continuation of the soul. So the concept of the resurrection of the dead was close enough that, okay, we want to hear more about this, because none of their religions gave a lot of detail of what happened with the soul that went on. In the case of the Greek, okay, so it goes down into Hades, into the underworld, and it's going to stay there forever in a lake, swimming around forever. As a Greek, I so don't want to die, because I'm going to be a disembodied soul swimming around in a lake forever. No way. That is so not a good answer if you're a Greek or a Roman citizen, because Rome's religion, after they took over the Greeks, they dumped their own pantheon for the Greek pantheon. And so Jupiter, even though that was the Roman god that was all powerful, by the time of Christ, Zeus was the Roman god, even though he's a Greek god. So the Romans taking over the Greek worship system kind of thing, their answer was, you die, you go to the lake, and you're there forever swimming. If I was a Greek, I want a better answer. With the other ones, Egyptians, your soul passes on into what? We don't know, but you're going to need food and money and a good version of your organs. So we're going to cut those out, put them in a jar next to your body, so that when you go on into the afterlife, you can take those organs with you. And they never give an answer as to what you're going to do with them.
Right.
So they preserve your organs. They've got money and they've got food for you. To do what? They don't know. So again, he's putting out there a bit of a concept they can relate to, sort of. And on another level, they're going, well, you know what? Jumping back to this God made out of gold, silver, and stone being made up, and you can't know anything about that. That's making sense. Resurrection of the dead. I believe that, but my belief goes nowhere. You've got an actual answer about this? Yeah. We want to hear more about this. The ones who were mocking most likely did not believe in the gods at all. They were most likely atheistic in their beliefs, or they believed in knowledge, and knowledge was power, but they did not believe in any other god other than themselves. So they would be the crowd that would be mocking. The crowd that's asking for more is the crowd who believes in a pantheon, believes in its nature insofar as, we're people and relative to the gods, but we're still going to have an afterlife. And that afterlife, I've never thought about before. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'd like to trade up. Have you got a better system? And not only has he got a system, but he's got a system that involves actual acting and being. That's starting to have a better sound to it. And that's the type of terms he's getting called back to speak to them on another day. We've hit 8 o'clock. So are there any closing questions that we have? This is a radically different experience as far as up to this point. We're working from people who've got knowledge of some form about God. And whether it be the Samaritans who are working with just the littlest bit of the law, or the Ethiopian eunuch who again had knowledge and was acquiring the book of Isaiah, Cornelius, who lived in an area where there's all these Jews. He's looked upon positively. So again, he's one of those God-fearers. But this one is a total jump out into the deep end and saying, okay, rest of the world, let's have a talk. And he's talking in terms they recognize in some way, and then they recognize how their answer falls hopelessly short of an answer they would like to have.